It's my great honor today, in place of Professor McMullen, who is presently on leave, to introduce to all of you the 1999 Chuanliu lecturer, Mr. Li Pei Wu. Mr. Wu is well known throughout the Pacific Rim for his activities as the chairman and chief executive of the GBC Bancorp and General Bank in Los Angeles, where he has lived for the last 2 decades. Left at that, it would seem to be a major accomplishment. But as anyone familiar with the Taiwanese is well aware of, we are dealing with the people, however modest they are, of super achievers. Mr. Wu was born in a village in Taiwan, but soon set his sights on higher education outside of his village, first into his county seat, eventually into Taida, and then in America, where he has lived essentially since 1965. Put in that way, it seems a typical Taiwanese success story of the post-war period. But there are special ingredients to this that deserve mention. The first is that he went to America at the age of 35, having already been successful in the banking world of Taipei. He proceeded to go to America and, in the true American fashion, was a pioneer first in Alaska. And having conquered Alaska and more than a few of its mountains, after 13 years of catching salmon, I didn't ask him how big it was. He moved to Los Angeles, and since then has basically taken care of the Taiwanese and the rest of the Chinese community there and his financial affairs through his banking activities. Needless to say, his activities there have been successful. They've been, so to speak, super successful, as anyone familiar with the history of the Taiwanese in California and the rest of the Pacific Rim is well aware of. And so it is with great honor and great expectations that I introduce to you today Mr. Li Pei Wu to give the first of this week's 2 Chuanliu lectures on the present economic situation in Taiwan in light of its successful past, its anxieties about the future, and on Thursday, its troublesome relationship with mainland China. Mr. Wu, thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Dr. McDermott. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very, very honored and excited to be here. This is the first time I come to Cambridge, and in fact, I was so excited that I could not sleep last night. Well, maybe that lack has something to do with it as well. So I have been in Cambridge for 2 days, and my impression was great. Particularly, I see everybody walking around and jumping around, running, and no wonder everybody so fit and so healthy. I wish I would move to Cambridge someday so that I can start my exercise. The topic of my discussion is, as you can see, where Taiwan's economic miracle persevere. First, I think in order to familiarize all of you about what during the past 40 years or so, what happened to Taiwan's economy, how was the economy developed, so that I would start out with some of the charts. Right. Yes, it works. From this chart, you can see that since 1960 until today, the per capita GDP increased to more than 13,000 from somewhere around $200 or so, so that you can see what kind of phenomenal growth of GDP it was during the past about 40 years or so. Consumer price index was very stable. As you can see that beginning 1981 until 1995, over a 15-year period, it increased from 82% to about 100%, so that 18% increase during that long period. So generally, the inflation has been under 3%. Export-import both increased tremendously during this period, and export increased faster and more than import. That's why a lot of foreign exchange reserves were created during this period of time. However, if you look at the government budget, the distribution of the government budget during this period, you can see that general administration was very stable. Defense spending dropped from around 45% in 1965. In fact, if you look at the early 50s, the defense spending was about 80% of the total government budget. But it declined quite substantially, so this is good. But if you look at what picked up, then you see that the interest payment picked up very significantly in terms of percentage, from 3% to 13%, and also Social Security related, welfare related expenses pick up from 7% to 24%. What emerging lagging is the education and technology related expenses, which basically maintained the status quo. Beginning 75, it didn't increase at all. The real GDP growth on an accumulated basis, this chart is, that you can see that it's, although slightly come down, but still maintained right now at somewhere around 6%, and in fact it started out with more than 12%, and even at 6% it was considered phenomenal GDP growth. International competition, this was ranked by IMD in Switzerland. You can see some problems this year. If you look at 1998, Taiwan was number 16. And in 1999, Taiwan was number 18. And Singapore maintained as number 2. Okay? And of course, USA continued to dominate the economy. Composition of domestic borrowing by public and private enterprises. This chart will show you the financial institutions, what they do with their money. If you look at this chart, then you will see that the public financing was much heavier than private financing. In other words, banking had been financing most of the needs of public companies. But then, if you look at the yellow chart, that is financing through private sources, so-called underground sources. For private companies, they were very high, around 40, and then gradually dropped to 20%. In other words, small businesses, those private companies, small business, they rely heavily on private financing, very high interest rate financing. But then, on the other hand, the public companies, they didn't have this problem. You can almost see that it's in the bottom, this green light, green line on the bottom, so they don't have to rely on anything else other than banking financing. In 1998, Taiwan import-export, in other words, trading relationships with other countries are ranked in that order. If you look at Hong Kong, and in fact Hong Kong was only the port on behalf of China, mainland China. So it's an indirectly import or export relationship with China. You can see that export through Hong Kong to China was 24.8%. And import was only 2 billion. I'm sorry, not percentage, it's billion. And import was 2 billion. So you had a trading surplus of 22 billion. And you can see that that is far, far biggest among all the trading relationship. So in other words, you can see how much Taiwan's economic future rely on the relationship with China. And because of good trading relationship and international competitiveness, the trade surplus continue to build up, and that's why you create a foreign reserve. And the trade surplus, again, this is using the chart rather than numbers. You can see that Hong Kong or China, in fact, was the highest. So this is just different way of showing it. So that the statistics I share with all of you. And so with that in mind, you can see that the economic miracle really was there over the last 40 years. Very, very little dip, and then continue to grow phenomenally. Very strong growth over a long period of time. So with low inflation, high employment rate, and with big foreign exchange reserve, surplus, increase in exports, and so forth, certainly you can say that it was an economic miracle. But these days, people don't really talk about economic miracle a lot because somebody think it's over. Somebody think of more exciting term, that is political miracle. Because the government of Taiwan brags that now they are in the process of creating a political miracle. Since 1987 or 88, around that period, Taiwan, and after the death of the second Chiang, President Chiang, Jiang Jing-kuo, the Taiwan started to transform into a democratic society. And so from the dictatorship regime to a democratic government, that process has been relatively easy, relatively smooth, and peaceful. And that was not easy to find, so that they can brag about the political miracle. I came here, I saw Cambridge got the study of Chinese, but I didn't see study of Taiwanese studies. I think with these two economic miracles, you should have one, I suggest. Now, I would like to share with you about all the history and how and why the economic miracle was created. You all know Taiwan was a very small country with a large population of 22 million today, and don't have much natural resources to speak of. Then why and how this miracle was created? I was born in Taiwan. I lived in Taiwan for 35 years, as Dr. McDermott said. So I had a chance to observe the making of this miracle during this period of time. Until 1968, I moved to the United States. But I continue to be somewhat involved with Taiwan's economy because my bank has been doing business in Taiwan, doing business with Taiwan for all this period, so that I had opportunity to observe and I had some experience with Taiwan's situation. So that would be what I intend to share with you today. First, let's look at the economic perspective. The government did a great job in publicizing the miracle, in doing a good job in propaganda to show how great was the government which created this miracle. So this became a popular belief. Let me share with you what the government say, and later come back to my own version of what created the miracle. First, the government claimed that export-oriented policy was the key to the success of Taiwan's economy, because a lot of export create foreign exchange reserve, and using foreign exchange reserve, you can do a lot of things. So that's what number one, government claimed. Number two, what the government claimed was that in 60s, well, the export-oriented policy, they claim it started in 50s. Then in 60s, you had extended the compulsory education from 6 years to 9 years, which created or provided a skillful labor force. So that's a second reason. Third reason was the so-called 10 national projects. In Chinese called 10大建设. In 70s, President Jiang Jingkou started these projects, and a total 10, including some communication, some transportation, infrastructure enhancement, and also include some basic industries such as steel, shipbuilding, and so forth. So that's third reason Taiwan's economy was so great. Number four reason, the government say that they took the so-called small and medium enterprise structure. In other words, unlike Japan, unlike Korea, Taiwan's economic structure framework was basically composed of small to medium enterprises. That's why we were immune from the Asian crisis, and we are doing so well. So that's the fourth claim government has. And then number five would be in the 80s. They claim that the government has successfully upgraded the industry to become a more high value added economic structure, and get into more technology and capital intensive industry. So that's why the industry economy took off. So those are the five major reasons government claimed. Now let's look at my version. In my view, the force of economic growth, you can look at external forces and internal forces. Let's look at external forces first. Number one, I say it's Japanese heritage. Taiwan was under Japanese occupation for 50 years. During this 50-year period, Japan created an economic level second to none in Asia countries. It was second to Japan until World War II, but after the end of World War II, actually Taiwan's economy was second to none. Japan set up transportation system, highway system, railroad system, and having a good compulsory education system, so the literacy rate reached 90% even before Chinese came over, and created a law-abiding nature of the people. And so I think that is one very important factor affecting Taiwan's economic growth. Number two, I would say that in 1949, roughly 2 million of mainland Chinese mainland, came to Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was defeated, and then he escaped to Taiwan with a lot of followers. Many of these peoples are intellectuals, professionals, so that created a good, economically good professional help to Taiwanese. Well, they commingle with Taiwanese people very well in the sense of economy, so that I believe that you can say is the second reason. Third reason, external reason, was in the 50s, the Korean War. The Korean War first created the political safety for Taiwan. The Seventh Fleet started to protect Taiwan, and as you perhaps recall, when Chiang Kai-shek escaped to Taiwan, United States basically abandoned Taiwan with their so-called white paper. But unexpectedly, that China get into Korean War, and so that upset, anger United States very much, and so they reversed the policy and created a political safe haven for Chiang Kai-shek, and also give a lot of economical as well as military help, military aid to Taiwan. So that a big boost to Taiwan's economy in 50s. Number four, I would say the external force is the Vietnam War. In 60s, the Vietnam War started, and the United States used Taiwan as a supply port for Vietnam War, also as a recreational center for GIs to come to have a vacation in Taiwan. So again, create another possible economic boom. When you combined these two forces, external forces, I mean Korean War and Vietnam War, in fact, it's estimated that the aid amount to about 150 billion US dollars between 1953 to 1969. So you can see 150 billion US dollars, that was not just a shot in the arm. It's very, very significant contribution to Taiwan's economic situation. Then my number 5 external reason is that your industrial upgrade. The government say the industrial upgrade, and yes, I say industrial upgrade, but let's look at the real reason behind this industrial upgrade. Beginning in 1950s, Taiwan started to have some students studied abroad, mostly went to United States. In fact, the average number of students went to study in United States was more than 10,000, average more than 10,000 per year. So that you can see hundreds of thousands of very skillful engineers and scientists were created. And most of these people stayed in the United States, in the big companies in the United States. In late 80s, because of the end of Cold War, and aerospace related recession, government cut expenses, and so forth, United States started to suffer. And so many of the big companies took this opportunity to so-called cut fat. They downsized the company. And in the process, many of the experienced, matured engineers were all laid off. So many of these engineers who came from Taiwan returned to Taiwan. Why? Because there was a perfect match between their skill and what Taiwan needed at the time. Taiwan started out with more labor-intensive industry, and you accumulated wealth. But by late 80s, there was a bottleneck. They don't know how to continue to expand the small business in Taiwan, so that they desperately need upgrade our industries. And looking at the computer industry, particularly PC industry, was such a promising industry, so that a lot of Taiwanese business people wanted to change their business mix to more high-graded or computer-related business. And so that's why there was a perfect match. And many of the Taiwanese engineers and scientists went back to Taiwan to help. And that's why created Taiwanese industries dominant in the worldwide computer peripheral component area, such as scanner, motherboard, or monitors. All these are worldwide very well recognized. Unfortunately, there's no R&D. Really, it's a component of that only, so that there was some problem I will describe later. Then let's look at the internal forces. I would say that the first reason for this economic miracle was the sense of crisis. As you all know, Taiwan has been under constant threat from China. So people are very worried about their security. And when you have this kind of crisis, you tend to work harder, accumulate your wealth quicker, and so in case someday something happened. Okay? So that's the sense of crisis. Drove the Taiwanese people to work very, very hard. And in fact, not only that, if you look at the history of Taiwan, even before the relationship or problems with China, Taiwan has been under the colonization of so many different empires or government, and so they have to change masters from time to time, so that they have no choice but to work very hard to please themselves. And also, anyway, they cannot get involved with politics, and so might as well become a wealthy people. So that's one important reason, in my opinion. Second one is the land reform program. In the 50s, the government started a land reform program. And land reform program had two stages. First stage, so-called 375减租, that was 375减租, that was to reduce the landlord wealth and then give the farmers a better deal. So that's the first step. The second step was so-called 耕者有其田. You just give land, redistribute land to farmers. Then what happened? And why government wanted to do this? It was right after so-called 228 incidents. In 1947, there was a 228 incidents. During that incidents, many of Taiwanese elite was eliminated, was killed. And the government continued to feel being threatened by the native Taiwanese, because afterward, the governing body in terms of population was much, much smaller than the body being governed. So they wanted to dominate the political arena. And one thing they had to do, that was the land reform. So it was a very politically oriented scheme, because in Taiwan at that time, the elite and well-educated intellectuals were the landowners, so-called 地主改革. So because of that, the government felt that unless you eliminate this elite group, then they are concerned that this group might gang together and then resist government ruling. So that started out as a political intention or political scheme. But unexpected consequence happened, because these landlords lost their lands, and they in turn get some money, some stocks of major companies, and get some of the crops from the farmers. Because of that, then now they got all this money. What are they going to do? They have no farm to cultivate, and they could not just keep it there. So that many of those became, since they are intellectual and having more business sense, so many of them became small business owners. So the consequence was that because of land reform, many small business owners were created. And these business owners, in turn, became the engine of the drive force of Taiwanese economic miracle. Okay? So that's land reform. So you may say this is accidental, lucky, but it certainly had a good effect to Taiwan. Third internal reason was the government-related reason. As I said, the government wanted to have a stronghold, strong control on the political arena. Then what needed to happen? From the people's standpoint, Taiwanese people, they had no choice, as I said, but to develop economy. And the government also felt that they need a safe valve, because if you control everything, then there may be something will happen. So that they need to create a safe valve for the Taiwanese people. That was the economic affair. Free reign. Let you develop whatever you want to do. I control the politics. You are free to do whatever you want to do. So that was one reason that created this economic prosperity. And in fact, also created those small businesses, because Taiwan being colonized for so many centuries, people wanted to be their own boss. But how can you be your own boss? Politically, you can't, because over the centuries, you change one master to another. So you are not able to become politically your own boss. So what else? You want to become economically your own boss. And so this kind of drive creates many small businesses. There are more than 200,000 chairmen of the board in Taiwan. So that's number 3 reason. Number 4 reason is culture and family value plus the spirit of pioneering. As you perhaps know, people of Chinese stock, particularly if they immigrate to other countries, they have been very, very successful economically, because they treasure the family value. They worked very hard, and they had the spirit of pioneer, so they had to work very hard. Taiwan was no exception to this, so that your family value, you work so hard, you even till your land almost reaching the railroad. I can see that happen. Or you had your own living room at your factory. So that in early stage, that was very true. So they worked so hard to create this wealth. Fortunately or unfortunately, I think this kind of family value creates the lack of transparency. People wanted to keep secret themselves. Family business, not your business, nobody's business. That kind of mentality, that kind of situation created today's problem. Part of the problem comes from the industrialization. You need to have a better organized economic infrastructure, and you need to have good transparency. But because of this, you got a problem. So you made it because of family value. Now you may ruin it because of family value as well. So those are my versions. Now if we come back to take a look at the government version, see how much was true and how much was not true. Okay? First, let's examine, they call it export-oriented policy creates the wealth. It's totally untrue. Because if you look back history, Taiwanese government started out with a so-called import substitute policy. Taiwan was so poor, they don't have enough foreign exchange. But the way the government thought about it, well, why do we import at all? Why don't we do something ourselves? So the factory was intended to manufacture something to substitute your import. So in other words, it's passively try to save foreign exchange, not creatively try to increase foreign exchange. But private sector, those small businesses, they don't care, they don't know what was the government policy. They just keep pumping, and then during Japanese, during Korean and Vietnam War, they get to know outside a little bit better, and they, through some kind of intermediaries, they started to export and found that labor-intensive material were very welcome in the United States and some European countries as well. So after they found this, then they took their briefcase, go around everywhere and sell Taiwanese goods. That's exactly what happened to Taiwan's economy, and so it was created by the small to medium businesses, not created by the government. Second, there's a 6 to 9 years compulsory education, from 6 years to 9 years. I will give some credit to this because this did create a more skilled, better working force in Taiwan. However, I would say this was somewhat limited because Taiwanese people at that time, already more than 70% went to junior high school. They are a kind of people who really wanted to educate their children so that whatever you can afford, they try their best to get there. And so the effect was from 70% to maybe 95% of junior high education. So there was some effect, but not totally relying on that. Number 3, 10 national projects, as I said. If you look at the Zhonggang, the steel building company, Zhongchuan, the shipbuilding company, they have lost money all the way for several tens of years. They have not been really helped Taiwan's economy. And besides, Taiwan's economy, they don't really need the heavy industry. It has not been relying on heavy industry. It has been relying on the international competitiveness. So this was a mixed success. I have to give credit for the infrastructure in transportation, like harbors, like railroad and highway, many highways, Hongguan Gonglu and the freeway, all that helped. So this is a mixed success, I should say. And they say they have created small and medium sized enterprises. I don't want to elaborate. It's not true. They did nothing, but it's just by accident. And industrial upgrade, as I said, it was not because the government started the policy. Government started a slogan, not policy. Okay? That's what the government did. So from this, I think we can conclude that one thing, it was not the Taiwan's economic miracle. One thing, it was not. It was not because of government planning or government leadership. It was the people of Taiwan who created this economic miracle. And secondly, you can see that there was so many luck involved, so many coincidences involved, even accidentally got into something. But then Taiwanese people took advantage of the situation. They did take advantage of the situation and created this miracle. Okay. So that's my assessment of the miracle. Now, I would like to get into next subject. That is the current problems, current situations, whether this miracle really has ended or will be ending pretty soon. That is the subject. If you look at the chart, in fact, you can see that everything almost slowed down beginning 1995. Your symptom, the slowdown, or even some red light signal started to show up. GDP growth rate, as you see, the last several years is down to 5-6% range. Your unemployment rate got higher. I didn't have this, but it's true. And then your international competitiveness got lower. You saw the chart last year from 16 to 18. And the foreign exchange reserve at one time exceeded more than 100 billion. Now it's around 90 billion. And if you look at the last year, a lot of bankruptcies. So these are the signs of some problems. The question is how serious these problems are, and whether there is a cure for these problems. So look at these problems. People started to associate Taiwan with Japan. They say, well, Japan got a very high foreign exchange reserve. They got into trouble. Taiwan had the same thing. And then Taiwan get hurt. The business and consumers get hurt in spite of large foreign exchange reserve. So was Japan. Okay? Taiwan and Japan both had long-term 40 years of strong economic growth. And right now, both countries are having so-called economic dislocation. So in that sense, there are some similarities. So we have to ask a few questions ourselves and see what to answer. The first question we have to ask is, will Taiwan follow Japanese footstep so that it would have a prolonged recession, another 7 or 8 years of prolonged recession? Second question is, was this Taiwan's economic downturn having anything to do with Asian crisis? Was that part of Asian crisis? So that's the second question. Third question is the key question, that is the subject matter. Can Taiwan's economic miracle persevere? Okay. So with these two problems, we get into the true gut of the issue. Before I attempt to answer these questions, let's look at more specifically what are these problems. Okay. First problem, as I see, is the infrastructure problem. And that, having accounting problem, regulatory problem, and so forth, I will describe and explain one by one. The first problem is accounting problems. As I said earlier, there was a lack of transparency. And so basically everybody got 3 sets of books. You have one for the public or for your shareholder to see, another for IRS to see, Internal Revenue Service, and third for yourself to see, so that you got 3 sets of books. Okay, so accounting was never been really accurate to start with, even including some the publicly traded company. In spite of that, there were many international accounting firms in Taiwan, but certainly they did find a way to teach them, in a sense. Okay? And this, I think, this is some kind of common problems with most of the Asian countries. If you remember that a few years back, 2 presidents of Korea went there and was sentenced to death. Why? Because they accepted bribery, they accepted bribes from conglomerates, big companies, for hundreds of millions of US dollars. But nobody questioned, okay, what in the world that the CPA was certifying. These hundreds of millions of dollars of expenses never showed up in anybody's book at all. But they can give that kind of money. So you can see how prevalent is the accounting problem. Recently become more big problems because Taiwan started to get bigger. I mean, Taiwan's business started to get bigger, and there was a multinational problem, not multinational companies which have subsidiaries all over the world. Now, you don't really consolidate or properly consolidate your financials. In fact, my bank sees this every day. A parent company in Taiwan, they got piled up with inventories, nowhere to go. They cannot sell. So that they establish a subsidiary in the United States and they ship this inventory to United States and inflated the price, become receivable. Inventory became receivable. And then in the process, you add 20% or 30% to so-called added value for sale. And as a result, you on one hand, on your balance sheet, you change from inventory to receivable, and then on the other, inflated your bottom line. And so that is very prominent in the last several years. And when the government found this out, unfortunately, government say, okay, beginning 1999, we will have consolidation and we will have elimination of accounting books. But then 3 business elders in Taiwan. One was WLP07, who is Taiwan's the head of Sanghui, the business association. And the second was WLP07, who was the head of the industry association. And the third was WLP07, who was the head of the both industry and commerce. They all went to see, I believe, President Lee. They objected to this very strongly. So government backed off. And they said, okay, at least this year, we are not going to require transparency. We are not going to require the consolidation or elimination. So that's what happened to your accounting. I think I'm a little bit too slow. Regulatory problems. I'll try to speed up, okay? There are a lot of regulatory-related problems. Taiwan has a long way in terms of having a good, sophisticated regulatory system, and also has a long way to go for executing or implementing those regulations. Okay. Let me give you just one simple example. Happened recently. In fact, some of the money come to my bank as well. Okay. There was a conglomerate in Taiwan who established 3 or 4, I think total of 4 subsidiaries, and then 3 of them or publicly traded companies. Then what he did, he bought proxies in Taiwan. You can spend money to buy proxies so that you can get elected, you can become a majority, even you don't actually own stock of anything. So they bought proxies of Taichung Medium Bank. And then the result was that group became management, became chairman of the board and the president of that Taichung Medium Bank. So after that, then he borrowed using subsidiary A stock to borrow money from his own bank, and then use that bank to bid up the second subsidiary. So then he took the inflated priced second subsidiary, again went back to Taichung Middle Bank and then borrow even more. And so repeated this process, eventually get to about 9 billion Taiwanese dollars. Just this 9 billion equivalent to close to 300 million. So just this company did that. Okay? So you can see, how can they do this? Where is the regulation? Where is the SEC? You know, it's full of loopholes in this area. The cross in United States, as least I know, the cross-holding of affiliated company. You have to be very careful. You have to report. You have to be transparency. And then you are not allowed to have insider trading. Unfortunately, they just borrow money and then bid up. So a lot of insider trading happened. So with this, you see the problem. And, now the execution part. Okay. If you got political connection, nobody can do anything to you. Recent example, the boss of, I don't know how to interpret, 县议会议长, okay, the speaker of the Taiwan provincial government, who was so well connected, who became the central steering committee of KMT. But then, so he borrowed money, he invested, he did whatever you wanted. Then when the Taiwan provincial government was abolished, or basically abolished, then he in turn ran for the second in command, the vice speaker of the legislature Yan, and he lost. Only when he lost, then his problem surfaced, and then he escaped to Los Angeles, in fact. Another example, the Dan Ken Tiong, okay, who was Kuomintang's big shot, and he intended to run for the speaker of Taipei city government, and he lost. Now, once he lost, he bankrupt. So you can see that before, when you are politically well connected, nobody can touch you. But once you lost your power, then everything surfaced. Okay, so that you can see the execution. What kind of execution was this? Do we have an unbiased, fair execution of the regulation? It's very much not so. Third problem, banking problems. I'm a banker, so I know. Supposed to do business based on credit worthiness. Earlier, I already mentioned they are in favor of the big business and in sacrifice of small businesses. And this is very unfair, because the small businesses were the one who really created the miracle, as I said. But they could not borrow enough from the government, the banking industry. So they had to rely on underground financial help, and that often is 5 times more expensive than what the banking industry can provide. So that's one problem I see in banking. Just one example, I just keep giving you some examples. Now, there were 16 private banks established in early 1990. And the government had a good regulation. They said, well, this is going to be a public company. Nobody can own more than 5% of the stock. No conglomerate, no group can own. But today, everybody knows. Okay, for example, 万通银行, the Taiwan's 万通银行, that belongs to Presidential Enterprise, 统一企业台南bank. The Huaxin, that belongs to KMT. Okay. The Taixing belongs to Xinguang Group. Everybody know, but government regulators. Everybody, it's an open secret. Everybody know who controls what. Government does not know. Okay, so that that worrisome. Okay. Fourth problem, KMT problem. Do you know KMT itself is the largest conglomerate in Taiwan. They control the biggest assets in Taiwan. And they also participated in the government decision making, so that you can see what kind of potential conflict of interest and insider trading could happen. No wonder they got more and more money, and it becomes stronger and stronger. So every time Taiwan got into trouble, then one of the financial institutions got into trouble, like the one 泛亚银行 got into trouble, then KMT can say, okay, I help you, I take control of this bank. So that's what KMT is all about. And this is not economically unfair, this is politically very unfair. Because how can a tiny DPP compete with KMT with hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars? It's said that 500 亿, 500 million Taiwanese dollars. So translate into perhaps, goodbye, okay? So that KMT, and that through one company, it's called CDC, China Development Corporation, that is owned by KMT. And that entity can do anything they want to do. No regulation, nothing can control them. They are not investment banker, they are not commercial bank, but in fact, they did both. They continue to do both, and nobody can touch them. So you can see that at the execution of the regulation. So no wonder Moody's is a great entity, agency in the United States, downgraded most of the Chinese banks. Next one is policy-induced problems. Chiang Kai-shek, when he set foot on Taiwan, basically, they don't have economic policy because they never thought about stay long in Taiwan. It's a so-called 牙刷主义, brush, use it and throw away. Okay? So at that point in time, nobody did anything. So there's nothing, no policy to speak of, and then people had free reign. So that I already described. But until recently, when the problem started to surface, government entities tried to do everything. So from doing nothing now to try to do everything. The evidence is, first, they decided to pump $28 billion into economy, mainly stock market and current and save some industries. 28 billion is 10% of the annual GDP of Taiwan. So the government throw that kind of money into it. What they do? First, they support stock prices. They mobilize insurance companies, banks, and pension funds, and their own money, and even KMT's money, to manipulate the stock price, to make sure the stock price would not go down further, because last year you had an election, and then they cannot afford to lose, so that they had to do everything to make sure that everything look, at least on the surface, look all right. So they put 8.7 billion as the rescue funds for stock market. Okay? You don't really hear things like that in other countries. Okay? So you have to ask, is government function to save stock market or to rescue economy? What should be your priority? Unless you have a long-term, solid foundation, that's what the government's job is all about. But unfortunately, it's a stock gap issue. I have more example about this stock gap. Okay. Second, they try to boost the economy by ordering banks. See, you are not supposed to call loans. If there's a big industry got into trouble, you don't call loan. If you call loan, I'm not going to help you in the future. Okay? And every bank in Taiwan has to obey it, has to obey the government with this, so that you have so-called margin call is totally eliminated. You know what will happen, create a lot of problem loans. Then in turn, government manipulate accounting by saying, okay, from now on, if you got a loss, then you can charge off over a 5-year period, rather than if you got a loss in the United States, at least I know, the examiners came, oh, this looked like a loss, then they want you to charge off, even look like a loss. But even a real loss, they don't ask for charging off. They say, we charge off over a period of time, so that your accounting book would not look too bad. Okay? So manipulate the accounting principle. And also change their classification of so-called problem loans. Classification was eased. In the United States, you have so-called substandard and doubtful and loss. Then if it's a loss, you charge off. If it's substandard, you provide 25% loss. And then if it's doubtful, you provide 50%. But then Taiwan's government eased that standard, so that on surface, the banks would look healthier. But Loomis, they understand. Moody's, they understood this. So they could not say, well, because they look healthy, so they are healthy. It just simply prolonged the problem and could surface at the later even more. So this kind of short-sighted, stuck gap, so-called 头听一头，卡听一听一卡, that kind of mentality. And even worse, they don't have a standard to see what need to be rescued, what you cannot rescue. They don't just set up that standard at all. They just say, oh, this is in trouble. Okay, that help you. Okay, so those with good connection with government, obviously, would get help, much better help. So these are the infrastructure problem. Then you have another problem called, I call it rule of man, not the rule of law. That means in the early days, two Chiangs, Chiang Jing-kuo, Chiang Kai-shek, they don't really understand economy, so that they don't touch economic issues. And again, they do nothing. So that not many people can really influence the highest rank of the government. Now, afterwards, Taiwan became democratized, and President Lee, in his good intention perhaps, wanted to be very popular and willing to have access to everybody, so that the tycoons having golf game with him all the time, and then pretty soon the entire government policy changed. Now, the most recent example being that 证交税, the stock trading tax. Taiwan does not have stock ownership gain, stock tax, the income tax for stocks. They only got the stock trading tax. It's already very liberal, right, compared to any United States. I have to short gain, I have to pay 50% and so forth. But then there's no income tax. But yet they want to force the government to reduce the exchange tax, the trading exchange tax. And when the 行政院 executive yuan rejected, 萧万长 said, no, there's no way we can do that. But then one meeting with President Lee, everything changed. 萧万长 immediately said, yeah, we have to. Okay. So that is a rule by man, not rule by law, obviously, right? So after this, we have one more issue, Taiwan's problem, that is China relations. Taiwan relied very heavily in terms of investment in China, in terms of trading surplus. So it's very dangerous things in that China is the only adversary of Taiwan in the entire world. But then Taiwan was so concerned, so worried that my enemy's economy could collapse. My enemy, if they don't do well, then I would be in trouble. I haven't seen any country worry about their enemy so much. So obviously this is an important problem. But this would be thirdly subject, okay? So basically we have all these problems. I just cite a few examples. So the question, we get back to the question, are we going to follow Japanese footstep? I would say perhaps not, but there is a possibility. The reason being, although we mentioned a few similarities, but Taiwan's big business and the influence of big business had been for a short period in existence. So if there is a good government willing to change that, is not as difficult as what Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, who ruled Japan for 40 years and is so closely interconnected business and government relationship. So it's fairly short phenomenon. That's one reason. If you want to correct it, yes, you still can. Secondly, I think Japan's union was one of the obstacles for the real reform. But Taiwan, there's basically no real strong, well-organized union to speak of. So for these reasons, I'm going to start to shorten up, okay? So it's a little bit easier to correct, so that I would say the answer perhaps is no, but you have to do a lot of other things. Otherwise, yes. Okay. Is it influenced by Asian crisis or part of Asian crisis? Again, there are some similarities, like infrastructure problem, as I said. But Taiwan's foreign exchange was so strong compared to other Asian countries. Taiwan's international debt was minimum, only 250 million for the entire country, international debt. So it's just nothing at all. So compared to Southeast Asian countries, problem really is not the same. Taiwan, again, is a more small to medium business based industry-based economy, although some of those countries are small economically, but they are really belong to, like Korea's economy is really big business. Indonesia's big business, rely on big business. In fact, every bank in Indonesia was bankrupt. Okay, so those are the situation compared with those countries. So I would say the answer is no, really not that big a problem, although you have your own problem. But in fact, Taiwan's economic problems started even before I talked about 1995. So even before the Asian crisis started. So the answer is no. So now obviously come to the end that with all these problems, what can be done? Can we count on present government to change, to do whatever necessary planning and legislation or rule and improve the sophisticated rule infrastructure and everything, at the same time also set up good industrial policy to make sure that Taiwan will continue to be competitive internationally. You have to have a long-term plan and also need to execute this plan very carefully, not to interfere with the private sector, but set up a good framework of rule. You would not be the player, but you would set up good frame of work for private business to prosper. That's what we need in Taiwan. But I am concerned, I doubt, with the present government. They have so much vested interest in everything. Can they really do it? So, fortunately, there is another way of doing it. That is, change the government. So, I believe you have to change the government for economic reasons and for political reasons. Economic reason, I already said, the opposition party is matured, but then they don't have as big interlocked problems with business. They don't have the big party power or party economic power to speak of, so they don't have a burden to speak of. So they can fresh start and set up a good long-term economic policy and economic infrastructure. Politically speaking, although the government bragged that democratization is a political miracle, I say this miracle is not completed until you have a peaceful transition of the government. So in order that Taiwan can continue to brag that they have political miracle as well as economic miracle, we have to change the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Wu, for such an incisive lecture. I'm sure all of us learned a great deal, not only from your wealth of statistics, but also from your excellent sense of humor. Dr. Wu has offered to accept any questions that we have about his lecture and is willing to give his response. So please take this opportunity to ask him whatever you wish about what has been discussed so far. Who would like to ask the first question? We're all too polite. I wonder if I might ask the first question, which refers to one of your charts. And I think it essentially showed that Taiwan's foreign trade at present is linked with two countries. That's to say, its close neighbor, the mainland, and then its distant neighbor, America. Both of these countries have not had any significant turndown in their economies because of the Asian crisis. So in some ways, Taiwan has been protected by this limited focus on its exports to these two countries from the shocks of that crisis. At the same time, as these countries come out of this crisis, To what extent will Taiwan's small and bigger companies, as they spread more and more abroad, find themselves enmeshed in these countries, and presumably these countries' great difficulties in carrying out the changes that are necessary for stable growth, which Taiwan would invest in? And if that involvement does occur, as I suggested, to what extent will the probable incompleteness of the transformation of their country's political economy cause problems for Taiwan's future economic growth?
Yes, it's true that Taiwan relies very heavily on two countries. One is the United States, another is China. And the part of China, I would leave that to next segment of discussion. But the relationship with United States has been more on the friendly basis. So although it's concentrated, but will not have immediate crisis for that reason. Although United States in early 80s, they got into deep recession, and as a result, Taiwan suffered. People say, Taiwan okay? So that is the problem with this. Yeah, if the United States got a cold, then you got a pneumonia in Taiwan. That's what that means, okay? But my most concern is the competitiveness, because Taiwan has been doing well simply because of computer-related industry. And as I said earlier, they are just components. Right now, China can do it, Thailand can do it, Malaysia can do it, and they can do it cheaper. So the real question for Taiwan's economy is, how do you really enhance your economic level so that always, for them, always try to chase you, but you are always ahead. And that requires a very good, well-planned, long-term economic policy, as I think. But currently, this is one major problem, because you got into bottleneck again this time. You are relying on computer industry, and that is very much in trouble. And politically speaking, I don't know how would this affect it politically. I'm sure the government during next year would try to again make sure things look okay and sound okay, because in March next year there would be an election for the president, so that KMT cannot afford not to keep the economy there. And I'm sure if you wanted to, you can have it for a short period of time, although that would prolong your pain and create more trouble at a later date. But I'm sure KMT would do that. So during the next 1 year or so, I don't really expect that economic problem would surface much more than what we already have seen. And so that political stability might be maintained, at least from KMT standpoint. They don't want to see change, because if they lose, then they lost everything. In fact, even possibly their big chunk of wealth of the party's wealth could lose. Yeah, and they cannot afford that. So I'm sure they would do everything to stop that from happening. So although I am a supporter of DPP, I'm not a member of DPP, I want to say that. And I support mainly because of I want to see the peaceful political transition. But I am not that optimistic that next year there would be a political changes.
Given that the economic vibrancy of Taiwan has relied substantially on small and medium-sized businesses, has the creation of a stock market been a mistake?
I would not think so. The reason being was stock market supposedly function as long-term capital gathering means. Unfortunately, it has not been that much in that sense. But you have to realize that to some degree, the capital intensive and larger business entity is not avoidable, not totally avoidable in this world. So that you have to deal with the problem with large business rather than say I eliminate the large business. You don't want to have a bias. You don't want to be too closely connected with large businesses, and you want to be fair and monitor large businesses. But that is not to say that you abandon the small businesses. Many small businesses found their own way to everywhere. For example, when 2 years ago, Len Zhan, the current Vice President Len Zhan, visited Southeastern Asia about 3 years ago, instead of 2. And he saw so many Taiwanese businesses are in Southeastern Asia. So he came back and all of a sudden woke up. Said, oh, we have to move forward to south. 南进政策, have you heard that? You have to forward to south. So all of a sudden that become a policy, but rather that become a slogan because people already set the policy on government behalf. Okay? So the ideal situation is for small businesses to be able to go anywhere internationally where the environment is the best and it can operate most effectively. Government should help the small business in that way. They don't necessarily have to stay in Taiwan, but you have to set up the mechanism so that they would pay their due taxes and so forth, and then the benefit would come back to Taiwan. So that's what needs to happen. They don't force them to stay in Taiwan.
You don't want to give the government very much credit for helping the upgrading of the economy. You talk about the steel industry and the shipbuilding industry that had mixed results. At the same time, you talked about the bottleneck emerging in the late 1980s for skilled engineers in computer industries. So by what process were companies by themselves upgrading to get to this bottleneck? And can't you give the government some credit for helping with research and development and subsidized credits to firms?
There are some credit, very, very limited credits you can give them because they did talk about you have to enhance the technology. That was the government slogan. But if you really look back to government policies, you don't see how effectively you wanted to enhance the value-added technology industry. The real matchmaker was Li Yuanzhe, the 中央研究院 the central, I don't know how to translate. Academic Syndicate. Li Yuanzhe set up 8亿 1 or 10 billion of Taiwanese dollars personally, get donation from various business entities, and used that money to induce the scholars, the scientists, the engineers in Taiwan to come back to work for 新竹科学园区, 新竹 technology, I don't know again how to translate that. So Li Yuanzhe help them, help the scholars, children go to American school, for example, give them housing subsidy, all kinds of help. And that really is a big matchmaker. So I have to give that credit to Li Yuanzhe personally, not the government. Yes.
I do agree several points speakers said. However, I do have to make some comment based on my own personal experience and observation. I'm a visitor here at the Cambridge for 1 year. I was born in Taiwan in 1949, right after the war, and then I was educated through all this process to see how the Taiwanese, how the Taiwan economy grows and they're getting more and more prosperous. Then I got a chance to went to the United States to get my study and got my PhD there in physics. Fortunately, I'm not an economist. And I fortunately also did something very interesting and worked in the United States for a couple of years. And in the middle of 1988, I was a full professor at Columbia University at that time, and I decided to go back to Taiwan to work with the people in Taiwan. And I was a professor now, and then I had this opportunity from the government support to come out here for another 1 year visiting. Okay. I think there's a picture here I want to mention is. It's a very important factor that probably the speaker didn't mention in his lecture. Of course, I mean, there are many land reform and all that are very important, but I think the people in Taiwan, speaker has mentioned that also. But I think all this group of people, we are growing from the so-called growing pain. Of course, there are a lot of problems. We know, we see a lot of problems right now. But we are facing that problem and trying to resolve that problem. And we have a group of people constantly coming back before even the answer. I went back before the answer. And in fact, I was one of the recipients after he came back, this special chair fellowship. Okay. And I think right now, there are a lot of people like myself, even younger, more energetic, more educated, better, well-educated in Taiwan. And try to work, try to resolve all the problems. Yes, the speaker mentioned there's many things that, which is, I think, coming out of this is a long history of growing. And we really see the progress and the change. Economically, well, probably not that much. Politically, especially, we see all the change. And this is really very helpful. And also, we are trying to change all the, in terms of education, in terms of people, relation, everything. Okay. And the government do provide certain opportunity and provide certain kind of channel to get improvement of the situation. For example, myself, why I could come over here because I'm on my sabbatical and government give me some fellowships I can spend in UK. I can learn something, not only in my field, I also learned something from here, the higher education system, the high school education system. So in one day I can bring it back and then make this and maybe have a better progress of what's going on in Taiwan. And also, I think in this room there are many students who are now working, starting here, and eventually they're going home to Taiwan. And that is the main workforce, which I think is very important for the Taiwan economy miracle.
You mean internationalization?
Yes, in fact. And I think in that sense, of course, I mean, the early education, the brain drain to the United States, and now the return to the United States is a very important factor, as the speaker mentioned that. I think there are more and more people like myself who are younger, more energetic, people who are really loving the land, loving the people there, and want to work with them. Okay. I think that's the most important factor to have all this grow. So, return to this topic. I myself strongly believe, Taiwan will grow. We have many problems as nation internationally, with China, with the other countries, but I think Taiwan will grow.
Thank you. I certainly also hope so. I'm providing the opportunities. I mentioned about how can Taiwan grow, rather than concluded that Taiwan will not grow. So we don't have a disagreement there. The government policy, although you mentioned, yes, there were something they are doing on the individual basis, but my remark was basically on the global basis as to whether government really did, was a major engine or driving force to this economic process.
Well, as you mentioned, in order to sustain Taiwan's economic miracle, the most important thing is to remain the international competitiveness. And also you mentioned that Taiwanese economic structure is basically based on small and medium-sized enterprise businesses. my question is, would this be, because there are, there are certain situations where small or medium-sized business simply couldn't compete with large-scale businesses. So the question is, would this kind of economic structure be a holding back force to the Taiwanese miracle for economic growth, basically?
If properly managed, I don't think it's going to be the fallback of Taiwan's economic miracle. Take United States as an example. United States certainly have a number of large businesses, but basically from economic standpoint, it's really having a lot of small business as the driving forces. Now, small businesses are mainly labor intensive, so that it become more and more difficult to compete internationally if they stay in Taiwan, because wage is high and then land is scarce and so forth. And that's why earlier I mentioned that you had to think Taiwan Inc. as like a conglomerate, and then you set up regional economy and send your people, your business to wherever most fit to survive and prosper. I think that's the answer for smaller and labor-intensive business. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Department of Chinese, I would like to welcome you to the second of this week's lectures, the Sl121 lectures, given by Mr. Li Pei Wu. Those of us who were fortunate to be here for the first one on Tuesday have now a much better grasp of the economic dimensions of Taiwan's success and problems. This afternoon, Mr. Wu is going to give us a similarly incisive analysis of Taiwan's political problems, particularly that troublesome relationship which, as we all know, every island seems to have with its nearby mainland. Coming from Manhattan, I know what that means. Professor McMullen has asked me before I shut up to invite everyone, to welcome everyone to the reception that follows this talk and its questions at the Faculty of Oriental Studies. If you don't know where that is, just follow me. But it's essentially a 2-minute walk to the left once you leave this building. And there'll be a reception there from the end of the talk to roughly 7:30. And once again, you are all welcome. I hope to see you there. Mr. Wu.
Thank you for coming again. Today I would be discussing about the Taiwan-China relationship, which is a troublesome, as Dr. Lemon just mentioned. Politically, yes, it is a troublesome relationship. Moreover, economically as well, there is a difficulty between two countries. although in fact it should not have been that way. Unfortunately, because of political situation, it's become more and more troublesome. Politically and militarily, as you all know, Taiwan and China are adversaries. Particularly China, right now, take more and more aggressive stance toward Taiwan. In spite of that, in recent years, Taiwan has changed a lot. You perhaps all know, in 50s until 70s, when Chiang, two presidents under the name of Chiang, were in power, Taiwan continued to claim that there is only one China. I mean, Republic of China continued to claim there was only one China, and Republic of China was the only government who represent China and the whole China. So because of this, you can understand the political dilemma. However, in recent years, from practical standpoint, Taiwan no longer consider itself to represent the entire China. Well, they never say that, but from all the indications, they in fact moving toward that direction. And economically, because of Taiwanese economic miracle, as I have discussed on Tuesday, by late 70s and early 80s, the small and medium businesses, they are mostly labor intensive, find themselves no room to grow or to survive in Taiwan. And as a result, many of them moved their investment in China and doing a lot of trade with China. So there is such a dilemma that economically they should, and they are in a sense, good partners, but politically they are adversaries. So because of that, it's a troublesome situation, and I will try to analyze the situation from a banker standpoint, because I'm a banker, in fact, deals with both sides on a daily basis, every day, particularly on the economic side, trading side, business side. So I see some of their mentalities on both. I see some mentalities on both sides, and I will try to share that with you today. First, let's look at the political and the historical aspect. So why this problem all tangled into such a difficult issue? Let's just go back to early part of this century. I will just very briefly lead you through the events which leads to today's situation. In 1895, Taiwan was turned over to Japan by the Qing dynasty because Qing was defeated by Japan, and as part of the peace treaty, Taiwan was given to Japan. That was in 1895. In 1912, Qing dynasty was overthrown by the revolutionists led by Sl121 and some others, and a Republic of China was established. However, thereafter, for about 20 years period, China was in fact a divided country because war laws all over. Nobody obeyed anybody. And so for 20 years or so, China was not really under one government, so-called warlord Junfa. By 1930s, through elimination, there were only two major power force left. One was the KMT, the Kuomintang, which was led by Chiang Kai-shek, and which was pro-Western, basically the capitalist party. And then another was the Communist Party, which was led by Mao Zedong, which was pro-Soviet Union. So that in 1930s, the situation changed. There were two major parties, and Chiang regime was on power at that point in time. In early 40s, because of China's engagement with Japan in terms of war, they started to fight against Japan. So for a short period of time, the Communists and the KMT joined forces against Japan until 1945, when Japan surrendered. And then two parties resumed their bitter war. This civil war, in fact, this was a civil war, ended very quickly in 1949. So between 46 and 49, there was civil war in China, and ended up that Chiang Kai-shek was defeated, and then took his troop and his followers, of total about 2 million, escaped to Taiwan. On the other hand, right after 1945, General MacArthur appointed Chiang Kai-shek as the person or his troop to accept surrender from Japanese troops in Taiwan. So Chiang Kai-shek was appointed by the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces. Chiang Kai-shek was not invited by Japan to come to Taiwan to turn over Taiwan back to Chiang Kai-shek. Even subsequently, that in San Francisco Peace Treaty between Japan and Allied forces, and subsequently between Japan and China, at that time China was still under Chiang Kai-shek, Japan gave up Taiwan, but Japan did not turn over Taiwan to any party. There was no successor named by either Japan or the Allied forces. However, on October 21st, 1945, Chiang Kai-shek's troops practically occupied Taiwan, and that regime continued to govern Taiwan until today. So, for about 30 years since Chiang Kai-shek moved to Taiwan, the civil war against Communist Chinese actually ended right after 1949. From all practical purposes, it ended. But Chiang Kai-shek continued to stress that his government represents the entire China, and he still was the leader of the entire China, including mainland Chinese. This myth, and is a myth, was accepted by most of the Western countries because Chiang Kai-shek considered himself his brand of ultra anti-communism, and that was very well received by Western countries. It's like music to their ears. So they pretend that yes, Chiang Kai-shek still represents entire China. So for about 30 years period, in spite that People's Republic of China actually occupied entire China. And Taiwan was under the Chiang Kai-shek control, not necessarily given to Chiang Kai-shek. And only Taiwan was under control of Chiang Kai-shek. But the Western countries pretended that Chiang Kai-shek represented the whole China. This myth kind of broken in 1971 when United Nations recognized People's Republic of China, accepted People's Republic of China as a member of the United Nations, and Chiang Kai-shek, even though under the advice of the United States to stay as a member under the name of Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek refused. So this was indeed a lost opportunity for Taiwan and China's relationship to get into trouble like today we have. So even that, Chiang Kai-shek continued to pretend he would represent the whole China. He continued to brag that he would one day counterattack China and recover his lost territories. So that continued until 1979. By then, even United States recognized People's Republic of China and severed that diplomatic relationship with Republic of China that was represented by Chiang Kai-shek. So today, only some 20 or so countries in the entire world still recognize Chiang Kai-shek's government, or today you may say Taiwanese government. And between 1950 until about mid-1985, so for more than 30 years, Taiwan and China was totally separated. No political, no military, no economic relationship whatsoever. But by mid-1985, because of economic growth of Taiwan, because of the economic upgrades of Taiwan, the business people, particularly small business people of Taiwan, found that, they found that they have no room to survive in Taiwan, so that they will have to find a way to survive, and China provided a convenient opportunity for them. I will discuss in more detail about that event, but in any way, so they started to move to China, doing trade with China, invest in China without government approval. In fact, even against government law and regulations. But they did that anyway. So by 1987, this situation became very serious. In addition to this, business people moving to China, those came with Chiang Kai-shek, the 2 million people came with Chiang Kai-shek in 1949. By 1987, they were mostly very old. And being a Chinese, they kind of homesick, like to go back to visit their homeland, China. And at that time, this was not allowed by the government. So some pressure created toward the government from, on one hand, the business people, on the other, those mainlanders come with Chiang Kai-shek. They wanted to open the door, find a way to officially deal with China. And so that's when the trading relationship was established, kind of officially established. And it mushroomed very quickly. And by 1991, the government of Taiwan, or Republic of China, would have to establish some governmental or quasi-governmental organizations, such as, how do I call it? I think I wrote down. Straight Exchange Foundation and Mainland Affairs Council, something like that. 大陆工作委员会 and 海基会 海岸 So that was a recount of basically the history between Taiwan and China, both economically and politically. Now, I'd like to cite a few important political facts. First, during the past 100 years, Taiwan has never belonged to China. The entire 100-year period, since 1895 until 1995, until today, more than 100 years passed, Taiwan never legally belonged to China, not the Republic of China, let alone People's Republic of China. I often wonder that if in 1945, General MacArthur did not appoint Chiang Kai-shek's troops to go to Taiwan, instead, like what he did with Japan, Korea, Philippines, and so forth, send American troops to Taiwan. And quickly, in 2-3 years, Chiang Kai-shek was defeated by Communist China. What would have happened? Could Chiang Kai-shek still go to Taiwan and ask General MacArthur, say, well, would you give Taiwan to me? I doubt that very much, because at that point in time, once Chiang Kai-shek was defeated, United States already recognized that Chiang Kai-shek regime was a very corrupt government, and they issued a so-called white paper, denounced Chiang Kai-shek, and in effect saying we are not going to have anything to do with Chiang regime. So in 1949, that was the case, and so perhaps this whole issue would not have occurred today. Unfortunately, history sometimes is very, very sad in that accidentally, Chinese people get tangled into all this problem, tangled into this civil war between Communist Chinese and nationalist Chinese. And Taiwanese, in fact, were simply the victim of two sides, the civil war. Another fact is, People's Republic of China, since they won the Civil War, since they occupied the entire China, they never set a foot on Taiwan. They never controlled Taiwan. They never taxed Taiwanese people. They never spent one penny trying to help Taiwan. So up to today, from any angle, all angles, People's Republic of China never really politically control Taiwan. And legally, whether they have the right or not, that is a big question. But nevertheless, People's Republic of China continue to insist that Taiwan is part of China, and swears to use force, if necessary, to reunify it. Well, that sounds familiar, because in the early 50s until late 70s, that was exactly Chiang Kai-shek was saying. that we would use force if necessary to reunify China, to take back China. Now, Taiwanese government is not saying that, but People's Republic of China continue to insist that Taiwan is part of China. And in that sense, Chiang's regime and the People's Republic of China, they were the same. They both insisted that Taiwan was part of China. How about Taiwanese people? Taiwanese people consider themselves an accidental and innocent victim or bystander of Chinese Civil War. And the majority of them do not want to be part of China. So that is the political fact as I can see. Now, let's talk a little bit about the economic side of the issue. First, I invite you to take a look at a few charts, say what kind of economic relationship it was. Chart 1 shows you that this was since 1979, showing how fast the trading relationship between Taiwan and China has grown. As you see, the curve is very sharp until 1996. As you might remember, that was a year of presidential election in Taiwan, and China used force, they used missile to threat Taiwan. So that's a year, perhaps a wake-up call to Taiwanese business people. So you can see that it's increasing very dramatically over so many years. Second chart, you can see that by 1998, and in fact 1998 was lower than 1995. I just wanted to use the most recent data. You see that number 4, Taiwan's number 4 trading partner is Hong Kong. It's not Hong Kong, it's China, because there's no direct trading relationship between Taiwan and China. So everything goes through Hong Kong. You can see that in terms of export, it's counted as number 2 next to United States. In terms of surplus, they had 22.8 billion of surplus in their trading with China. That was far, far away from any other country you can compare. If you look at the entire Taiwan's trading surplus that year, total was 7.3 billion. And that trading surplus from trading with China was 22.8 billion. In other words, assuming other things equal, which economically it would not be, but assuming other things equal, then Taiwan would have about 15.5 billion of trading deficit in 1998 without surplus from relationship with China. This chart only shows it differently. It's the same thing. You can see that how big the China trading surplus was on the second bar. Okay? Again, this shows that trade between Taiwan and China over these last several years. Let's get into, instead of starting from 1970s, now early 80s, now it's from 1993 instead. And investment from Taiwan to China. If you look at this chart, again, this is 1994 to 1998, in terms of amount, it continued to increase, except in 1997, as I said, the presidential election, then they are slightly lower. In terms of cases, it's also substantial. But I have to say this chart is not accurate in that, as a businessman, I know there are a lot of investment in China which were done through various channels outside of government statistics. For example, Taiwanese people now can freely remit up to $5 million US to anywhere in the world on an individual basis. So a family of 4 can remit 20 million outside of Taiwan to somewhere. Most of them come to United States, and my bank benefited. Where does this money go? Nobody knows. We know a little bit. Okay. Most of them set up subsidiaries company in the United States and using subsidiary companies to invest in China. So statistics sometimes is not misleading. This is one particular. I believe there got to be so many times as big as the indication here about 15 billion of investment, many, many times. Using a very simple statistics, Taiwan's foreign exchange reserve peaked in 1995 with more than 100 billion in foreign exchange reserve surplus there. Now it's only 90 billion. So there's a reduction of about 15 billion. In spite of that, between 95 and here today, every year continue to have trading surplus of between 8 to 10 billion each year. So you can see from 100 billion in 1995, theoretically should have been by now become about 130 billion or more. Why it's become 90 billion? It tells you what kind of unofficial route that this money went. So that's the economic relationship. When we talk about billions of dollars, sometimes you don't really grasp the significance of this. Taiwan's 1 year's GDP is about 280 billion. So the trading surplus from China was about 22 some billion. So you can see it's about close to 9% of the entire country's entire GDP from contribution through this trading surplus, so that your reliance on China was so big. That assumes your investment, I don't know exactly how much, but I would not be surprised that it would be 50 billion or more in China, because China claimed there are more than 30,000 projects going on, investment projects going on in China by Taiwanese concern. 30,000 projects. Think about if one project got a few $1 million, how much we're talking about. And it's not a few $1 million. And how many employment opportunities were created by Taiwanese business people in China. So you can see how close the relationship in fact has been. And rightfully so, in the sense that Taiwan's economic structure and China's economic structure has a perfect match. Taiwan need land, need natural resources, need plenty of labor with low cost, because of the, again, economic miracle, and the economy get higher and higher in terms of labor, and so labor-intensive businesses cannot survive in Taiwan, so they need that. They need that outlet. And China needs capital, China needs technology, China needs management capability. So it's a perfect match, even without other considerations, let alone both countries speak similar language, both countries having similar cultural background. So there's no way for the government to stop the business people from investing in China. Okay. You see how fast it's grown. It has grown. In 1987, the trading relationship with China was $1 billion. But then by 1995, the relationship was about $23 billion a year we're talking about, each year. So out of necessity, Taiwan has to deal with China in terms of economic relationship. It's good for Taiwan, but is it good for China? Yes, it's very good for China as well. Because China would not, if when you see that Taiwan has such an big export surplus to China, you tend to think, well, China is very wealthy. They can really import a lot of things. They can afford to pay. No, that was not the case. Most of these exports to China were then manufactured in China, value added in China, using Chinese labor force, and re-export to other countries, so that Taiwan contributed to China for their economic growth, for their employment growth, and for their accumulation of surpluses. So it's good for both countries. Unfortunately, politically, it was difficult, but then for Taiwan, again, I have said on last Tuesday that it is very dangerous, because even with a friendly nation, you don't want to have such a concentration of your economic relationship, let alone it's with China. And it's an adversary, an enemy to Taiwan politically. So that's why it's so worrisome. And also China's economic infrastructure, including legal aspect, including all other facilities, are still very backward. So then, why the Chinese people run such a risk, such a brisk risk, to invest in China? Earlier I said there was no other alternative. Well, what is the alternative? Government of Taiwan did nothing other than discourage them to invest in China. Discourage in recent years. But in early stage, government, as usual, takes a do-nothing approach. Well, if you're going to go, it's at your own risk. So, and Taiwanese business people tend to think they understand better than any other country about China, because they have dealt with Taiwanese government for so many years. They are used to corrupt anything. So if anybody can handle, I can handle. That kind of attitude prevailed. Well, of course, more importantly, they didn't have other choices. Again, if they had other choices, perhaps they would not be doing that. So still, a lot of money continue to pump into China, because the more backward, the more ruled by men rather than ruled by law, is better for us, because other countries, they have good accounting system, government will not allow them to bribe, whatever, but we can do it. In early 1987, when this economic relationship just started, China was really desperately in need of those three things I mentioned earlier. And China was not really opened up as yet, although it was under Deng Xiaoping then, but just started to crack down the door very slowly. In fact, in 1987, I visited China and I had some discussions with Chinese government officials. I suggested that they open up, take foreign investment to build up their economy. Their attitude was very negative because they were afraid that history would repeat itself. In early 1990 or late 1980s, as you perhaps all know, China was under Western countries' invasion many times, and they had to become kind of second to colony to many Western nations, controlled by Western nations. That kind of mentality was still very heavy in the Chinese government officials' mind. So they find Taiwanese investment to be great because no way they are afraid of Taiwan. Business people would invade China and take over China or anything like that. So they welcome the Taiwanese business people's investment in that early stage. And I often thought, if Taiwanese government took a more active role in that early stage, there might have been an opportunity for them to negotiate a better deal in dealing with China. Maybe can get some political favor. At least, well, allow me to enter into some international organization that not try to fight against each other, that stop it for the time being, next 20 years, that help each other, whatever, I don't know. But anyway, there was an opportunity, and that golden opportunity was lost because of the indecisiveness and lack of long-term planning of the Taiwanese government. As I said, Taiwanese government took a do-nothing attitude at the early stage. But later, when they found out it was dangerous, red signal was there that reliance on China was too heavy, President Lee threw out a slogan called "No haste, no patience." 戒急用忍. That's President Lee's slogan. Well, slogan is fine, but it's not a policy. A government leader try to use moral persuasion to businessmen. I don't think that will work. Well, it will not work on me anyway. Business people need to have active participation of the government. Find a way for them to go. When if China is too much, is not right, then what? That's what they expect of the government. But government did not do that. Until, in fact, 1995 or so, when Vice President Deng went to Southeastern Asia and found out that so many Taiwanese businessmen are there. So he woke up and said, well, it's a paradise. We ought to go south instead. Yeah. So that was, again, slogan. Even up to today, there was no very comprehensive plan as to what mean by go south. How do you go south? And how do you help them, the business people in those countries? Okay. So government lost a lot of opportunities, and the government was not helping. That's why the economical opportunity and economic problems existed both today. Politically speaking, Taiwan had this political stalemate with China, which continues even worse. Because, as I said earlier, in early stage when Chiang Kai-shek was in charge, at least one thing in common. Both of the Chinese government say that there's only one China. So they agree on that. At least that's one thing they agree upon. Although they don't agree on who should be governing China. In that sense, they are not. But today, as I said earlier, Taiwanese government no longer claim they represent China. They don't say they no longer claim, but from all the indication, they no longer claim because they wanted to have peaceful coexistence with China. And that means what? That means you already recognize People's Republic of China. However, you have to realize in the Taiwan's constitution or the constitution of the Republic of China, the territory of Republic of China continues to cover China, even Mongolia, outer Mongolia, everywhere. Okay? In early stage, Chinese leader, particularly Deng Xiaoping, said, "Oh, Taiwan's problem, no haste. We can wait for 50 years to resolve Taiwan's problem." And in fact, Mao Zedong, before end of World War II, even said that, said to Professor Snow, that Taiwan should be independent. Mao Zedong said that during World War II in an interview with Chinese journalists. But now, under Jiang Zemin and under Zhu Rongji, situation has changed. It become more and more aggressive. For example, in recent years, they bombed and they shot a missile in the Taiwan Strait, and they were also against President Lee's visit of Cornell University, his alma mater. And they even recently claimed that even after President Lee left office, he is not allowed to visit Japan. That's what Zhu Rongji said. Recently, in his visit to United States, he said, well, Taiwan's issue can be resolved through force. This is the same as the Civil War during Lincoln's, Abraham Lincoln's era, that South and the North, they were engaged in Civil War. And so North used force to reunify the country. So sound like very reasonable. They have had the right to take over Taiwan by force. But this example perhaps was not the best one. I hope not. The Civil War in 18th centuries were created because of, first, the North tried to liberalize the slave, and more importantly, South and North, every state, they voluntarily joined the Union, and they have agreement to that effect. Somebody breached that agreement. I mean, South breached that agreement. So when you breach that agreement, then the federal government wanted to give them a lesson, I guess. But Taiwan's situation, Taiwan never show any sign against China, never signed any treaty with China, and never been part of China. So how can you say that this is the same thing? Particularly, that was right at the time Taiwan and the United States were celebrating 20-year anniversary of Taiwan Relations Act, which was signed in 1979 when United States established relationship with China And in order to protect Taiwan from Chinese invasion, United States established this Taiwan Relations Act, and in that act is a domestic law, and in that act clearly stated that any invasion or threat to Taiwan would be considered a violation of the United interest, and the United States will react accordingly. And in fact, it did in 1996 when the missile was shot around Taiwan, and the United States government sent fleet in the Taiwan Strait to counter this attack. So when Zhu was visiting United States, he ignored the law of the hosting country and state that kind of thing. I don't think it helped China a lot, but I hope it did help Taiwan a lot. Now, why this is so difficult? Why two sides cannot really find a way to reconcile the differences, I mean political differences? Solutions come to my thoughts. First, talk about China side, is a Middle Kingdom complex. That's how I call it. In their mind, over 5,000 years of history, since Huang Emperor, Huang Di, China considers itself Zhongguo, in the middle of everything. The emperor was called Tenzi, son of the universe. Son of the universe will have to govern the universe. So that kind of complex was very, very vivid everywhere in Chinese leadership mind. So based on this concept, based on this mentality, then they would consider there's only one China, and there could not be any other China, because China is the center of the universe, so that there's only one China. And no motherland can be separated. Well, I don't understand what I mean by motherland. In fact, this morning I was talking to Dr. Lee, he said, what I mean by 固有领土? 固有领土. I some time ago discussed with a very famous law professor, Dr. Pen Min, who was a candidate for presidency in 1996. I said, can you help me with this 固有领土? Well, now I interpret that as the motherland. I don't know what to write or wrong. He said, well, there's no such concept in the international law, so he does not know how to translate this 固有领土 either, because in international law there's no such thing as 固有领土. There's no such thing as sacred, unseparable land. There's no such concept worldwide. Then another way of interpreting this Middle Kingdom complex is that all the creatures with Chinese blood running in their body are forever subjects of the one and only one Chinese nation. So that is the second concept of this Middle Kingdom complex. Therefore, Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. Based on this theory, I think Singapore, Thailand, Korea, and Vietnam are all inseparable part of China, even Chinatowns everywhere in the world. So the problem is obvious. In their mindset, it's really difficult to talk reason with them. And this can be illustrated in another way. In Chinese, there is a 华人 and 中国人. But they consider this all the same. That's why translated into English, there's only one word, Chinese. You don't separate what's Chinese. Chinese of the same country belong to China, the subject of the country called China, or the Chinese in terms of ethnic connection with China, or with Han Chinese, you don't separate. So the concept is not separated. And I think that is the biggest problem, complex with China. Second problem with China, as I see it, is they need to find a scapegoat. They need to find a scapegoat for what? China has a number of problems right now. Economically, you have so-called socialist economy. You also have so-called market economy. And they have a slogan, in fact, say, we insist on socialist economy and market economy. And I don't know whether Professor Marshall how would Professor Marshall answer that question, that how can you have a socialist economy and a market economy coexist? But they use that as a slogan anyway. So there's a conflict in that sense. There's a conflict between the inlander and the coastal area. Economically, coastal areas are much better. Inlander are much more backward. And so inlander are unhappy and try to get their equal share. But then if you give them equal share, then the coastal area could not really develop quickly in terms of economy. So you have that kind of problem. You have a problem of all the state-owned enterprises. Almost everyone is bankrupt. But being a socialist country, you cannot afford to allow the government-owned, state-owned enterprise to go bankrupt, to go out of business. At the same time, to create a lot of unemployment. Unemployment is a Western world. It's a capitalist system. Being a communist, you're not supposed to have unemployment. So are they going to keep state enterprises alive by keep pumping into more money? Or are they going to make sure that they can survive itself, they can operate efficiently, and if they need to do that, they need their people. So that's another conflict they are having. Okay. There's one more conflict that is between central government and the provincial government. Provincial government now feel that I want to have a power. I don't want to listen to the central government for everything anymore. Particularly economically, I wanted to do my own way. And the central government obviously would not let them. So create a lot of conflict. A few years back, Ye Xuanping, who was the elder of Chinese warlord Ye Jingying's son, who was the governor of Guangdong. But then his power becomes so big that Deng Xiaoping wanted to take him to the central government to become vice premier. The announcement of that appointment was made, but for 2 years he didn't go to Peking. Okay. So you can see what kind of severe conflict there is. So, since they have so many problems, they're like any other political entity. If they got a problem, they have to find some way to unify them. They have to find a common enemy so that they can say, okay, let's do that. And so everybody forget about anything else. Okay. Taiwan became their scapegoat because Chiang Kai-shek and communism fought bitterly during the Civil War, and communism continued to insist that revolution is not completed because they have not reunified Taiwan. So they continue to be under revolution to make sure Taiwan belongs to China. And so they can focus issue on Taiwan rather than focus issue in their internal problems. So that's another area I see Taiwan became a scapegoat. So that's two reasons. The third reason is from the Taiwanese side. As I said earlier, Taiwan was drifted apart from China, further apart from China. And for mainly two reasons. One, I already said, is no longer is one China policy. Second reason, Taiwan has democratized. And as a result of democratization, there's all kinds of voices in Taiwan. It's no longer, government can no longer control things. Some people say, I want to have unification, I want to have independence, and status quo, maintain the status quo, all kinds of opinions. And the Taiwanese government will have to please the people in Taiwan, find a way to please people in Taiwan. Otherwise, they cannot continue to stay in power. So because of this, government dare not really getting too close with China because they would lose the ballot. In fact, in the poll indicated that people for independence gain momentum year after year, getting more and more. And so government cannot ignore this. But China could not understand this. They still think, you are the government, you can control everything. Why don't you listen to me? But they don't understand the democracy in the way we understood. Okay. Third reason for Taiwan tried to not to reunify with China was very much in their blood, because they did not have good relationship with China over the years. Earlier I said for 100 years they basically separated from China. But during this period between 1946 to 1949, the short period of time, Taiwan was under Chiang Kai-shek's occupation. At that time, Chiang Kai-shek was still in mainland China. And so the association with China was, at that time it was Republic of China, was a horrible one, because Taiwan had a better education system, law-abiding, and could not get themselves used to the way nationalist government, corruption, and so forth. So there was a so-called 228th incident occurred. On February 28, 1947, there was an uprising of Taiwanese people, and 20,000 Taiwanese elite were killed by the nationalist government, so that they have no good impression about the association with China during that 2-3 years short period. And prior to Qing giving up Taiwan to Japan, for over about 300 years, Taiwan's relationship with China was kind of on and off, because sometimes it was occupied by Dutch, sometimes Taiwan was occupied by Spaniard, sometimes was occupied by Japan. Okay, and so ethnically speaking, Taiwanese are no longer considered pure Han Chinese through intermarriage. I don't know what kind of blood I got, honestly, I don't know myself. Over so many years, who knows what you are? And so they no longer consider they ethnically they are Han Chinese. Many of them don't. Okay, so for all these reasons, it's drifted far apart. And so you can see the political stalemate, how serious it is. So, is there an answer? Obviously, there's no easy answer to this problem. Taiwan will have presidential election in year 2000. Every candidate claims they have an answer. I don't. Okay, I don't think they do, because it's such a complicated issue. No matter what you say, it could not be totally right. So the dilemma cannot be resolved today, I don't think. But the government of Taiwan can do a few better things. On one hand, economically, to have a long-term plan to diversify their economic development to other countries as well, to find the most efficient way to operate their economy and then become more globalized, more internationalized, because that's what Taiwan needs to be. Politically, obviously, they need to be very careful because they have a very strong and then not very friendly neighborhood. Anything you say wrong, you could get into trouble. In fact, often Taiwan was considered so-called troublemaker or advocate. And even when they say, well, we wanted to decide our own future. And it seemed to me it's a very, very natural. For 22 million people say, I have the right to determine my own future. But that is considered advocate, troublemaker in the international society because you offended Chinese, and nobody in the international society wanted to offend Chinese. So that is a sad story, that's a dilemma. So there's no way out, no way can get out quickly. I often consider the relationship this way. I'm a businessman, so let's use the business terminology. China is a very big company. Taiwan is a tiny, tiny company. China wanted to acquire Taiwan, or to merge with Taiwan. But then, based on business common sense, even small company shareholders have say about whether they wanted to merge with the big company or not. Maybe it's great, maybe it's not. At least they should have the right to decide whether they want to merge with the big company or not. That, I think, is the issue. But China, the big company, they say, no, you shareholder don't decide. Let's combine my shareholder, that is 1.2 billion, and your shareholder, 22 million. Let's combine to decide whether there will be a merger or not. I think that is the issue here. Okay? So obviously, there's no reasonable discussion can be pursued at this point in time. But I'm optimistic about the situation in the sense that since we change, Taiwan has come a long, long way for that change. Initially, Taiwan was very anti-communism, anti-China. Now, Taiwan no longer considers themselves anti-them. China today, of course, still is a very backward country, but economically it's changing, politically it's an appreciated change, and who knows? 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades from now, maybe both sides can sit down and talk more within reason. Or they can start to talk, but then you don't have to have a resort. Start to have a dialogue and say, okay, we meet together, and China say, well, my premises is that it's under one China system. We would consider, we would talk. Then Taiwan says, sorry, I don't think that is my premises. So see you tomorrow. Goodbye. Okay. So they can do that, and then keep coming, back and forth. And maybe 30 years from now, one day, one side will find some way. Okay, maybe there's a common ground somewhere. So that might happen, and it might come sooner than later, because with today's technology, China can no longer oppress its people. Information is so easily inflow into China. Now, I can send message to China by just going through internet or whatever mechanism. They cannot stop that anymore. The dictatorship can be effective only people are insulated, and China no longer can insulate itself, either from economic standpoint, from political standpoint, or from information inflow standpoint. So the change might come sooner than later. So hopefully that will be the case. Dr. King of the civil human rights leader in the United States said, I have a dream. I think you all heard about that. The former mayor of Taipei, Chen Shui-bian, said, dream is beautiful. With dream, hope follows. So I have my version of dream as well. So in conclusion, I want to say my dream for you. I have a dream that one day the government of Taiwan will change its constitution to officially disclaim any territorial rights other than Taiwan. Okay, that's one dream. Second dream, that one day the government of Taiwan will change its name from Republic of China to Republic of Taiwan. That's the second dream. Third dream, that Taiwan will officially recognize People's Republic of China as a sovereign country, a sovereign government. Because Taiwan has never done that. Still, nobody officially say, oh, you are a country in existence. Okay? So they should do that, recognize People's Republic of China. So establish and then try to establish diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China. They may say no, but you can try. That Taiwan will declare that it wants to become the most friendly nation of China. They want, because it's a big neighbor, and then you don't want to offend your neighbor, right? Mm-hmm. That Taiwan will strengthen its defense capacity, both militarily and psychologically. Why I say psychologically? Because Taiwan got a psychological problem. When they heard about China, then like that. So you have to mentally prepare yourself to defend yourself. And so that's my dream. That Taiwan will further strengthen its economy by developing a long-term, diversified, well-balanced economic policy. So that's about Taiwan. Now, my dream is that one day China will realize that a friendly nation called Taiwan is to the best benefit of all concerned, including China. Then my dream again gets to international society, international organization, that international society will no longer pretend that Taiwan does not exist. International society made this mistake before when they pretended that People's Republic of China did not exist for more than 30 years. Now they are making the same mistakes. So that my dream is that they would no longer pretend that and then recognize Taiwan as a country to be able to join international society, fulfilling their obligations and enjoying their rights as well. Thank you.